RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOps AF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of RevOpsAF, the podcast. I am your co-host, Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 16,000 plus revenue operators from all across the globe. And on the RevOpsAF podcast, we talk to people who are RevOpsAF about things that are RevOpsAF. And today I'm sitting down with Riya Grover, who is the CEO and co-founder over at Sequence. Sequence is a unified billing platform, essentially CPQ, quote to cash, lots of other terms that we could throw at it. I'm going to let Riya actually tell us more about Sequence and what she's doing there. And also, Riya, if you can add a little bit to that professional and personal introduction, that would be great. I especially would be interested in hearing about the origin story and why you decided to start Sequence. I think those are always unique and tell a lot about the company and why you're in the space in the first place, solving problems here. So take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Matt, and great to be here, and big fans of what RevOps Co-op are doing. So maybe I'll tell you a bit about why we decided to build a company in this space. This is actually the second company that I'm building. Previously, I had a B2B software company, and as I think many founders do, really saw a problem in this space whilst I was building my previous company. We were B2B software. We had custom contracts for every end customer that we sold. And the process of tracking the products and pricing and terms in those contracts and making sure we were accurately collecting revenue and capturing adequate revenue insights felt really hard to do. We looked at Stripe. Stripe is great for self-serve, PLG, and very standardized pricing, but doesn't work as well in a world where you have sales teams selling custom deal terms. And really what I wanted was a very easy way to take any sales contract and automatically translate that into automated downstream revenue operations, so billing, invoicing, and revenue tracking. And didn't feel like it should be that hard to do. It should be something that companies can put in place quickly and scale on top of. We thought there was a great opportunity to build something for B2B teams, particularly to connect those sales and finance workflows, which I know is something we're going to be talking a lot about today. We're in the age of AI, and I think that means exciting things for our business, both in terms of the types of companies that we're servicing, AI companies adopting lots of new pricing models that they need to turn into revenue. But it also means that we're really thinking about building this kind of revenue automation suite for sales and finance teams in a way that hasn't been done before.
Yeah, I love that. And I love when founders attack problems that they've experienced themselves and decide to go out and build solutions to really solve for those things. I think those types of products turn into the best companies, because who wouldn't want to solve a problem that they're experiencing themselves? And all those things that you mentioned, I have also experienced myself as an operator, trying to manage Stripe and finagle that into the billing tool and system that you need, and then doing all the exports to get data into a spreadsheet or some other tool so that we can report out on it in the way that we want to report out on it. And then sending out PDFs of different Google Docs and things that we would create for the quotes and the proposals. So I know I've experienced that firsthand as well. And you alluded to some of the things we're talking about. So I think in revenue operations, we talk a lot about alignment and the importance of alignment and breaking down silos and barriers that exist between different teams and functions on the revenue side. Typically, when we think about that, we're talking about marketing, sales, and customer success. But I think one of the big pieces that is left out and is becoming even more important is the alignment between revenue operations, or maybe operations more broadly, in finance. One of the first things I want to talk about is the era of AI and the age of AI that we're in. So to get us started talking about why this alignment piece is so critical between RevOps and finance, let's first talk about the pre AI era, what pricing and billing models looked like there, and why are they getting more complex as we move into this AI world where more and more software companies, essentially every software company, is adopting AI. So what did they look like over the last few years before AI was around, and what do they look like now, and why are they getting more complex?
So I guess complex is a bad word. I hate to think about it in terms of more complexity, but rather companies adopting new pricing models that ultimately aligns better with the value that they're creating for customers and what they're delivering. When we look at pricing, SaaS pricing has seen much evolution in the last few years. As you rightly say, the innovation there has accelerated with AI companies and the ways in which they're thinking about charging. So, big kind of surge of adoption of usage-based pricing over the last 4 to 5 years. I think this 2024 SaaS benchmarks index said about 25% of companies are using pure usage-based pricing and another 22% a hybrid usage and subscription pricing model. It's certainly something that we see, hybrid models between subscriptions, usage, and seat-based pricing. And ultimately, there's a lot that's been written about why adopt usage-based pricing, but commonly companies do it because it improves the value alignment with customers, actually charging them as they use the product. In many cases, you're able to capture the upside of a customer's growth. So fintech companies that charge a percentage on a transaction or a percentage fee on the amount of API calls you're making, ultimately you're doing it to benefit from the growth that your customers are experiencing. But also it's important to call out that a lot of the infrastructure layer, especially with cloud, GCP, AWS, and now the AI infrastructure layer, GPT, etc., are priced based on usage. The app layer built on top, we're leveraging those pricing models as well just to protect their margins and ensure that they're not charging a subscription when usage surges astronomically and then they're left with a really unsustainable margin structure. But I think beyond, we've seen significant adoption in outcome-based pricing models, output-based pricing models, and skill-based differentiation. Outcome-based is when you charge customers only when your product is successfully achieving a business outcome. Imagine buying a marketing tool and paying only when it generates qualified leads, or a customer service platform that charges per resolved ticket rather than per seat, which was a sort of traditional model. And I guess, again, it's gaining a lot of traction. It aligns incentives with the customer and appeals to the buyer who might be wary of large upfront costs before seeing real value. It is a challenging model to implement because you have to define and measure those specific outcomes and figure out the right price point to charge. We actually wrote a blog post on the considerations you might want to have when thinking about outcome-based pricing. There's also output-based pricing, where you're charging customers on the number of completed tasks or outputs rather than an input metric like an API call or compute time. This is particularly popular with AI companies where, the agent is completing a number of tasks for you. Those are fairly easily definable and measurable. And I think that the interesting thing here as well is when you start charging for kind of completed outputs or tasks, you start making a little bit more of a direct connection to that AI or agent being a direct replacement for a human FTE. If you're charging per sort of the kind of number of emails sent or number of things done, there is really a very kind of direct analogy to how you might think about paying a human operator. And frankly, that ability to make that connection as well and framing the AI solution as a cost-effective alternative to human labor actually really helps in the buyer's mind the product that they're getting feel predictable and value-based. So there you see pricing playing a pretty interesting role in framing the expectation for the buyer, which is why many AI companies are adopting it. One of the most interesting ones we're seeing now is skill-based pricing, where OpenAI, for example, just introduced ChatGPT Pro at $200 a month, kind of 10 times the price of ChatGPT Plus. This is because the Pro has an additional skill level. The AI capability levels in terms of reasoning, problem solving, and enhanced memory are greater. Historically, upsells were built around access to more features. We've all seen the kind of good, better, best plan where a certain number of features are bundled together and higher plans give you an expanded set of features. Whereas the principle underlying skill-based pricing prompts the opposite behavior with feature access. If you're hiring a more sophisticated AI to do the job, you actually want to ungate access to whatever features are needed to get the job done, because ultimately the AI is going to have more context and greater productivity and be able to output at a higher level as a result of it. This is a great example of how these new pricing models are being deployed in a world where software is framed more as an alternative to a human being, fundamentally reframing how people think about the product or service being delivered. And so you'll see there like pricing playing its like very important role. Actually, like it's not so dissimilar to when recurring subscription pricing first started, right? Where instead of paying for something up front, this notion of paying a recurring software as a service fee, I think also like frames and ties the buyer to what the thing is delivering them, it's delivering them something in kind of on an ongoing basis. Therefore, it is a much more natural thing to be paying using that pricing model than it is to be paying a one-off fee up front.
Yeah. You hit on a couple of things there. The market dynamics, the things driving these price model changes relate to the underlying cost structure and the expenses that these companies need to make to produce AI-driven technology. It's like you said before, when we navigated from on-premise software to the cloud, right? Every new customer that you brought on was basically very, very small incremental cost. You knew that when you built this software, your upfront investment was going to be large. As you onboarded new customers, you're essentially bringing on these customers for very little incremental cost for you as a business. So every new customer you bring on is 95 to 99% gross margin, regardless of whether they use you once or 100 times a day, right? That's now very different when you consider AI technology and AI agents that have a lot of computing power and costs behind every single use, right? Every prompt, every output. The underlying investment and cost structure to build technology in this space is changing, which is then driving demand for new pricing models that will allow companies to make money and continue to remain in business. And you brought up a couple of them around value-based or output-based. I especially like the output-based one. The thing for me with anything value-based is it's so tricky and hard to define value consistently over time in a quantifiable way that you're like, yeah, basically 100% of the time, if you give me an example, I'll be able to tell you if we've delivered value on that or not. That can be really hard. But the output-driven method, like you mentioned, where it's like, hey, we've completed that task, we've sent that email. I'm thinking of even companies like Zapier, which has had this kind of task-based model for a while. Right. Things like that really allow you to...
There's a great example where if they had gone in and said, we're going to charge per seat in the company, they really miss out on the opportunity to capture some of the upside of that usage. They're a great example of a company that can clearly measure the value they're creating through every zap they conduct, every API call connection they make by having it in place. Similarly, a fraud detection tool, charging per flag transaction, again, really easily measurable. And if that tool had adopted seat-based subscription pricing, it might not capture the upside from the growth in usage as companies use these tools more and more.
Yeah. I think we hit on why these new pricing models are going to impact sales, marketing, customer success, right? If you're on the CS team, you are serving customers. Customers are the ones who are going to be paying or leveraging products, right? So you need to be ready to serve them. If you're in sales, you're going to be the one closing deals under these new pricing models. You need to be able to effectively communicate how your company is delivering and your product is delivering value. And then marketing is the same way, whether it's product marketing or demand generation. You now have this new world that you're living in to try to, again, drive demand, communicate how you're delivering value to prospects and customers.
I think it's an interest to sales and CS team should always be close to how the customer is deriving value from a product. In a world where you're just using subscriptions, upfront annual contracts or monthly recurring contracts, what will typically happen is the sale will happen. That relationship is relatively hands-off for 12 months until a renewal comes about. In a world where you are pricing based on either the amount of usage or the number of outcomes, there's this variable component. It's really critical that CS teams have that data at their fingertips to understand actually what that usage has been so that they can make better, more relevant decisions with their customers and really optimize the value of those contracts over time. The infrastructure you need, the tooling you need is quite different if you are adopting these pricing models.
So let's talk about some of the silos that can get created. You kind of alluded to some of these already. I'm especially thinking about the old subscription or seat-based model. You have 95% gross margins. That's all changing now when you go to something more usage or output or value driven, which also means that things like discounting and all these other things that maybe were a lot less, I won't say less important, but didn't have to worry about as much, where it's like, 10% discount, or, we'll throw in this or whatever, right? All those things got to get thrown out the door when you have these new pricing models. The connection between RevOps, sales, your revenue team, and finance is now probably more important than ever. Let's first talk about where you see some of these data silos that get created between the RevOps teams and the finance teams. What are some of those things? And then we can get into how you solve for that.
I think fundamentally that data silo exists because sales teams operate in their CRM as their system of record. Revenue teams live in the CRM. Anything they're doing is typically there. Finance teams, will treat their accounting software, the ERP, as their ultimate system of record. And I think what is a fairly typical workflow for a lot of teams, especially as they get started, is sales team will go and sell contracts, right? They'll get those signed using DocuSign or something. All the data about the products, prices, commercial terms of that agreement, with any discounts, free trial periods, or whatever it might be thrown in multi-year price step-ups, all pretty typical things that we see in contracts. Those will all live in this PDF contract. And then finance are responsible for going in and pulling that out and making sure the billing and the invoicing matches that. This is already a pretty error-prone process. Even if you have relatively simple pricing and not much deal term variation, because it's inefficient when you're manually duplicating entry, it's very easy to miss things, especially if there's an upsell or renewal that didn't get noted. But then you move into a world where you do have software companies today using slightly more complex pricing models, or they have larger product suites and they're upselling mid-cycle. There's adding a few seats in month 4, or adding a new product line to the customer's contract sort of 9 months in. If this remains a process where sales teams are operating over here and finance teams are just manually expected to pull that out and make sure the billing and invoicing is updated, this is where we see real risk of revenue leakage, even at a relatively small scale, because it's really, really hard to capture all of those changes and make sure they're reflecting in the downstream processes. Just to give you an example, one of our customers said they expect to see $1 million in revenue uplift this year. They're about a 10 million ARR company, just from being able to automatically prorate seat changes as they happen mid-cycle, because if you're prorating mid-cycle, every day that you delay doing that is revenue that you're leaving on the table. So I think the existence of custom deal terms and just frankly a much faster software sales environment where companies are upselling products and growing their contracts with their customers does necessitate the right data integration and data orchestration between sales and finance. And what I mean by that is it's really critical that there's a unified shared source of truth. Whatever is sold is automatically translated into the finance engine, and then that data is also pushed back into the CRM so that sales teams and CS teams can understand real time how customers' revenue and usage is tracking against that contract.
Yeah, makes sense. You brought up CPQ as a solution. Obviously, you're building a CPQ company, and that kind of provides that bridge between ops, RevOps, sales, and finance. A couple weeks ago, we did a digital event around this topic of zero CRM. We actually talked about what's the whole point of a CRM in the first place? Everyone assumes you need a CRM, but what is it actually supposed to do with us, especially in this era of AI where there's a lot of technology out there? What's the purpose of a CRM? And actually question, do we need a CRM, or do you need other things that do specific things? AI agent technology that kind of focuses on these specific slices. So I guess I'll ask you the same question of zero CRM or zero CPQ. Why do companies need a CPQ solution? Especially you look at some of the incumbents, those that have been around for a while, it seems like they haven't invested in their CPQ product in years, we as humans have kind of been forced to adopt this unnatural way of leveraging CPQ technologies. Why do companies even need a CPQ? What purpose should it serve?
Yeah, maybe just kind of a starting point. I guess for anyone who's not familiar, CPQ stands for Configure Price Quote. Really what it is a way to streamline the way you manage pricing and track pricing across customers, ultimately use those pricing inputs to build sales quotes and have a more structured data set around what was in each of those quotes. Some of the reasons companies look to adopt this, one is it really increases sales efficiency. Sales teams have templates, they spend less time kind of creating quotes, eliminates sort of the risk of pricing errors or confusion about what the pricing is. Ultimately, they can get these quotes out faster, more accurately, and with standard better branding and templating. We've all seen those really bad Google Doc versions. They can preset standard pricing combinations or pricing models that sales teams can quickly pull into a quote and edit and update the pricing if they need to. And I think ultimately, the CPQ does build a sort of a much more delightful end customer experience if you have a kind of really nice streamlined contracting and quoting workflow. What I think is really interesting is that I think a lot of companies index very high on the, how does this work for our sales users? And think less about actually the downstream benefits of adopting a CPQ. So, great, all those points I just mentioned about how this can kind of speed up sales team efficiency, reduce errors, all of that stuff is great. That's, I think, typically the primary thing that RevOps are thinking about. But there's also this tremendous benefit on finance, especially if you have a unified quoting and billing solution whereby every time there's a new deal, contract, upsell, or renewal, all of that data is perfectly captured for a finance team to bill, invoice, and recognize revenue. And it's actually one of the main reasons we're building a unified CPQ and billing solution, because we see them as two sides of the same coin. Billing is responsible for charging the customer for exactly what was sold in the contract. That perfect orchestration of data between the two allows you to achieve a scalable and accurate foundation for collecting revenue. The incumbents in our space, the Salesforce CPQ, for example, being a sort of default offering, have almost given CPQ a bit of a bad rap because they are sometimes, in many cases, so complex to configure. And actually, in many cases, because there's so much kind of complexity baked in there, probably actually add more friction in some ways to the sales process, and just take this exorbitantly long time to set up. And so what you'll see is many companies circumvent it and don't have that structured system of record connecting sales contract data with billing and invoicing. We saw a really interesting opportunity to build a CPQ solution that we can adopt in days. It's really flexible, can kind of edit and change pricing models as you need to. It's really, really quick for sales teams to spin up new proposals. The design is modern and kind of delightful to use, delightful as a Notion template or a Google Doc. We're reinventing the category and aiding the sales workflow, enabling teams to publish really kind of streamlined quotes quickly, but more so also making sure that data is captured in a way that it can be orchestrated to the finance team. And so you can really achieve accurate revenue collection against those contracts. Because ultimately for us, this is the main reason you're actually adopting a product that kind of structures and streamlines your product and pricing management.
Yeah. So I've got two more questions for you. What is RevOps related? What is not? So my RevOps related question, we talked a lot about the importance between building this kind of bridge and alignment between RevOps and finance. And specifically, we've talked a lot about the invoicing and billing and translating the stuff that gets sold into an invoice and bill that you can then send to your customer to get paid. But there's also a lot of other things around billing and invoicing that are important to finance that I'll say maybe RevOps is not always aware of or may not be the most obvious thing. I'm thinking of things like revenue recognition, forecasting, budgeting, stuff like that. So what are some of those other elements of building this bridge between RevOps and finance that can deliver a whole lot of value to people on the finance side that revenue operators may not be aware of today?
I think it's a great question. And actually, it highlights that this is a bidirectional relationship. It's not just that finance need inputs from sales teams to be able to accurately do billing and invoicing. Like, it's so valuable for RevOps teams to be able to have real-time, high-quality revenue data. Revenue recognition is typically a finance team responsibility, whereby they are responsible for accurately recognizing the revenue based on the contract structure and the pricing models used. And this is something that they have to do to obviously stay compliant and ensure that they are actually booking that revenue correctly in the accounting system. But actually having accurate, fast, real-time revenue recognition and having a automated billing and invoicing system means that you actually have better real-time revenue data that's easier for finance teams to access. We believe strongly that there's no one-size-fits-all ARR dashboard, right? Some of the traditional billing tools in our space will kind of give teams that one-size-fits-all dashboard, and it actually kind of has limited usefulness to finance teams and RevOps teams. They end up building their own dashboards in spreadsheets. One of the things we've done recently is partner with Equals to build kind of custom ARR dashboards using sequence data, where finance teams, RevOps teams can track that data, revenue data, customize how they're breaking down their revenue, and then also run forecasts in a spreadsheet style interface on that revenue data. I think our finance users have shared that this is incredibly powerful, not just for them, but because they're trying to arm the wider team, particularly the RevOps team, with an actual understanding and breakdown of what's happened to revenue so they can adequately forecast it. Breaking down revenue by product lines, geos, or customer segments. This is really valuable data for RevOps teams and marketing teams to make decisions. And it seems like every company should have this in place. They should be able to see exactly what is driving the changes in their revenue. But most customers we speak to, it's something that's really hard to achieve, and that's really one of the main things that we're trying to solve for these companies. Having a connected CPQ and billing system and a connected sales and finance or RevOps and Finance team can be a really powerful unlock for a company.
Yeah, the other thing I think for everyone in RevOps to consider is that the deals that your sales team closes and those things that you sell and then provide to your customers, that's what ultimately gets recognized as revenue on the financial statements. And that's going to be the thing that your board cares the most about, that your CEO cares the most about. And there are rules, right, around how you recognize revenue. For example, if it's the end of a quarter or the end of the year, whether revenue will actually be able to count within that period is dependent on when documents get signed. So even if you have something dated on the 31st, but the person doesn't sign it until the first day of the next quarter, that's not a deal you get to count as closed in the prior quarter for revenue recognition purposes. So understanding things like that ultimately are going to impact the salesperson's compensation and how much they've hit on their quota, what they can communicate on the board. So that's just one example of why things like this are so important. And then we talked a little bit at the beginning of this episode about the shift in the underlying cost structure of being able to deliver software and technology that is AI driven, where there's a lot more computing power and therefore costs behind that. If you as an operator can understand those details and where you can potentially deliver more value without marginal costs, those are the things you can arm your sales team with and ultimately deliver more value, more profitability, more revenue to you as a company. So that's really why this bridge and alignment between RevOps and finance is so critically important, especially as we look ahead throughout the rest of 2025 and beyond, because that's kind of been this missing piece. Maybe it's because it hasn't been needed as much, but I think it's been ignored. It probably should be looked at a lot more closely, and definitely something that should be top of mind for everyone in RevOps.
Absolutely. The example you gave of this contract wasn't signed till X date, and therefore it doesn't fall into this cycle of revenue and the way we're recognizing it. That's just a great example of a manual thing that a lot of finance teams are spending their time doing and kind of checking for these edge cases and this upsell came in, how do we treat this? This one's being billed annually versus monthly. How are we kind of amortizing that revenue? And when finance teams are spending all of their time doing these things where there's really significant opportunity for automation and agentic capabilities as well, they are not spending their time doing these more valuable things like looking at pricing and looking at kind of ways to ultimately kind of guide sales teams to basically kind of improve and optimize. We didn't get much time to chat about AI in the revenue automation space, but I think we're obviously solving a multi-step workflow problem, and we see a lot of really great opportunity to just really help our operators kind of cut out manual tasks and operate with more speed and precision. So just as a great example, ingesting a sales contract and being able to perfectly translate that into billing data that finance teams can bill for in one click, or spotting anomalies in invoices, or ensuring revenue recognition rules are correct, reporting insights. Like, there's some really, really interesting ways in which agents can enhance the human operator and help drive greater connectivity between the sales, RevOps, and finance teams.
Yeah, for sure. That was my RevOps question. My non-RevOps related question to round us out here. We are hosting RevOpsAF, our conference, in New Orleans is when we're doing the US version. That's going to be in May. And we're doing a EMEA event in Berlin in June of 2025 as well. And these are events that we'll end up hosting annually. So to set the stage, I want you to, and I know you had people from your team attend the conference. I think you're planning on doing the same thing this year. So I want you to pretend you are the opening keynote speaker at RevOpsAF in New Orleans. We have 350 people in the audience, and we announce your name. Everyone stands up. They all start screaming, super excited for you to walk up on stage and do your thing. What would be your walk-up song as you were entering the stage to deliver the opening keynote for RevOpsAF, the conference?
Here Comes the Sun by the Beatles.
Nice. Very good choice. I feel like that's very on brand. And also
I was born in London. I think I have to throw one out to a British classic.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't pick a Beatles song, there'll
want
be a
their money
riot.
back.
Yeah, exactly. You'll never be allowed back in the UK. I think one would be a great choice. It's a great analogy for the value that RevOps can deliver, and maybe should be played every time RevOps walks into the room, because they can be the sunshine for your revenue team. Riya, thank you very much for talking a little bit about the RevOps and Finance alignment and how that can be aided by an effective CPQ solution and some of the things that folks can do to solve that problem. Thank you very much for being on, but that's all I got for you, so I'll let you run.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep it RevOpsAF, y'all.